Greetings everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon where you are today. This is our third webinar in the Journey into Agile with Inflectra series. We are focusing today on mastering 5 essentials to requirements management. My name is Dr. Sriram Rajgopalan. I have my PhD in management, organizational leadership, master's in management, master's in computer engineering, a bachelorate in electronics and communication engineering. I started my career as a software engineer and moved along as a team leader, business analyst, project manager, scrum master, and an agile coach. And I have also served in the director and vice president roles. I have a number of different certifications, including portfolio management, program management, project management, agile, scrum, agile coach, Six Sigma black belt, and a number of other things. I'm also an instructional designer, speaker, writer, and author. I have teaching experience in a number of colleges across US, India, and Vietnam. Today's webinar is part of the 5-part series on Journey into Agile with Inflectra. Each webinar is 1 hour long, and we will reserve time at the end for questions. The webinars introduce the concept using a tool. Therefore, there is some expectation on your part to set up access with the SpiraTeam. The completion certificate is based upon specific requirements and passing a certification quiz. In order to become eligible for this certificate, you register for the webinar and attend them. And if you are not able to attend, view the archive when it becomes available. Experiment with SpiraTeam some of the things that we discuss. Take the quiz and pass it. Do that for all the 5 webinars and you will be eligible to receive the certificate. If you have any further questions, we have prepared a frequently asked questions page and you can refer to that for additional information. Journey into Agile with Inflectra has 5 different webinars. We are now focusing on the 3rd webinar. Requirements. In a nutshell, are they simple or complex? The corporate business practices has evolved significantly. The products we develop are getting more complex and sophisticated. No longer is the software always having a graphical user interface for users, because wearable technologies and surgical implants transmitting updates to a mobile app are becoming commonplace. Scientific progress in nanotechnology and biotechnology, delivery of software, platform, and infrastructure as a service on the cloud, innovative products supported by artificial intelligence, machine learning, Internet of Things, and robotics, training through gamification, augmented reality and virtual reality, surveillance, security, and entertainment delivered through drones, followed by the explosion of big data for business intelligence and data science are constantly on the rise. These emerging products and applications and services will require identifying, gathering, and grooming requirements, a critical aspect of project management and product development. According to the Pulse of Profession 2018 report published by Project Management Institute, surveying several organizations globally on their projects, the number of projects that are increasing in complexity has gone up from 35% in 2013 to 41% in 2018. While complexity is increasing, there is another disappointing story that is developing too. The survey results synthesized by Project Management Institute and reported in the Practice Standard for Requirements Management indicate that 53% of the organization lack a formal process to validate requirements in an unbiased manner. Combine this with the 49% lack of resources to perform an integrated requirements management, challenges arise a lot. Now, if we think this is because of the growth of agile practices that focus on incremental and iterative delivery, then that assumption is challenged by only 33% of leadership thinking requirements management is even a critical competency for strategic success. So, there is an important challenge ahead of us in managing requirements from inception to closure. But what is a requirement? Contrary to thinking of the requirements as specifications for a product or scope of work for a project, let's think of the requirements broadly. PMI comes to our rescue in establishing this definition as, when properly implemented and supported, the critical competency of developing and managing requirements enables the organization to meet stakeholder expectations, improve project performance, meet organizational benefits, and achieve tangible business outcomes. If you pay close attention to some of the keywords in this definition, it is stakeholder expectations, performance, benefits, and outcomes that stand out. When we don't see the big picture on the value of the capabilities that we develop to realize the strategic benefits, then we are not managing the requirements. The pressure to get more functionality to the market faster, better, and cheaper with the types of products and services we are developing currently means that requirements will grow to become more complicated. This would mean more modeling of the user base, establishing sampling approaches to prove our hypothesis in developing prototypes, or monitoring the quality of work produced in operations. These things will surge. Organizations are increasingly facing more standards globally. For example, the Telephone and Consumer Protection Act (TCPA) controlled several types of telemarketing calls. Prescription and Drug Marketing Act (PDMA) controlled the safe and effective use of drugs. We have seen Sarbanes-Oxley Act in the financial industry for internal and disclosure controls. Similarly, we have seen HIPAA regulations in the healthcare industry. Recently, take the California Consumer Protection Act and the European Union's General Data Protection Regulations that have put additional emphasis on specific roles, responsibilities, and controls. More organizations will therefore continue to invest in tools that allow integrated requirement management solutions, such as the application lifecycle management solutions. We have covered in our first webinar about the staged approach to evaluating an integrated application lifecycle management solution, focusing on services, traceability, auditability, governance, and engineering. As a result, the best tools and platforms will be value-driven and not just be feature-driven. Based on my experience, I see a few trends that are evolving in managing requirements better. These are the bidirectional traceability between requirements and test cases and requirements to the binary. For instance, a good requirements management framework should realize that requirements is not written only once, but are progressively elaborated. Then if an existing requirements changed, then the tool should automatically flag an existing test case as a candidate for review. As mentioned in the earlier webinar on the 4 ceremonies to deliver agile projects better, the backlog must be groomed for at least 2 iterations ahead of the current iteration. As the product strategy changes, market demands fluctuates, and organizational priorities evolve, the ability to manage change transparently through the tool becomes pivotal. This transparency should also enable seamless collaboration with different types of stakeholders through a set of governance workflows. The tool should facilitate requirements management evolving from projects and processes as templates to enable reuse across the organization. As different businesses leverage specific tools, the requirements management tool should also enable integration with other tools. Similarly, different project delivery frameworks, including but not limited to Agile framework, should be supported. Last but not the least, the tool should be audit-friendly, where the system tracks timestamps, history of changes, and facilitate gathering digital signature receipts. As you can see, the requirements management must start from the strategic value and organizational benefit. Whether you are responsible for project, program, portfolio, or product management, starting with a why behind the strategic value and benefit framework is very much needed. The field of systems thinking truly helps us here. Some of the foundational systems thinking questions that you can combine with the 5 why approach are listed here. Getting the answers to these questions from your own research or from stakeholders will ensure that you have good requirements to begin with. These are: where are you today? Where do you want to go? Why do you want to be there? What are you willing to prove by going there? What are you willing to give up getting there? How do you know that you have reached? Now, since I introduced the project, program, and portfolio, let's understand them from a systems thinking perspective. The project often focuses on producing some output. These are the unique capabilities. These capabilities must work within a large context. Some of these capabilities may be producing incremental benefit, but such benefits from many projects must be integrated and consolidated for the organization to generate outcomes driving benefits. These are the focus of programs as they produce awesome value. For example, as we deliver similar projects for several clients, we gather a lot of data that can be studied to come up with prescriptive guidance to the clients. As the clients benefit from our expertise, they stick with us longer, which benefits the organization. But the organization should have a portfolio of many benefits, some interconnected and some mutually exclusive. As the organization begins using prescriptive guidance, they may develop their own products, invest more in technology infrastructure, train and recruit talent to keep up with the scalable growth. Such a focus on a portfolio work will be driven by strategy to differentiate oneself from the competition. So, depending upon the scope of our initiative, short-term or long-term, project, program, or portfolio level work, the type of requirements evolves from high level to low level continuously. Therefore, the requirements have a life cycle. The practice standard for requirements management also emphasizes this by coming up with 6 stages. These start from the needs assessment. Then we move to the operating structure and governance framework within which the requirements are managed. Then we move to the process of eliciting requirements through document analysis, interviewing, observations, market research, brainstorming, focus studies, and so on. As we gather the requirements, we analyze them for the value they would add. Simple measure to evaluate is the return on investment. In other words, does the time and money invested in addressing that requirement add value? Then we monitor the changes to the requirement through the voice of customer and the voice of business as we iterate through the changes and evaluate the solution delivered as the product moves through its life cycle. Using the concepts of system thinking and understanding the life cycle changes of requirements, we really can start the race ahead with clearly identified value-added requirements. As the saying goes, a problem well-defined is a problem half solved. This requires one to be strategic about gathering requirements. As we explore these stages, I will share my own approaches to managing requirements better, finally leading to the 5 areas that you should focus on. The first stage in requirements management is the needs assessment. One of the best techniques to assess the need is going through the SWOT analysis. Here, we are evaluating the strengths and weaknesses internal to the organization and the opportunities and threats external to the organization. Business savvy users will start looking at the Porter's 5 forces that shape the market and hence validate the need. The next approach people often follow is the best play analysis. Here, you further analyze the SWOT dimensions for political, environmental, societal, technical, legal, and economic aspects of the market and user requirements. I personally added the ethical and demographic dimensions to this framework, calling it Best Lead. This approach helps to look at the requirements considering the several corporate scandals and ethical violations, as well as the customizations needed from different demographic populations. Now, analyzing these 8 dimensions may be difficult and involving, just like how quantitative analysis in project management is very involved when doing Monte Carlo simulation or sensitivity analysis. So I came up with my own approach that I called the TOE principle. It stands for technical, operational, and environmental feasibility. In the technical feasibility, the focus is on whether we can do it. That is, we assess details like technology, people, and other resources. In the operational feasibility, the focus is on whether we can sustain it. In other words, can the help desk, services, customer service, product management, and operations sustain the product delivered in the market? In the environment feasibility, we focus on whether we can afford it. The financial, legal, and regulatory environment, for instance, that requires us to continuously make updates and support the product. Whether it is project management or product development, I have found this TOE approach to be simplistic without consuming too much time. The second stage is about the requirements management. This is very closely related to the needs assessment and produces the required artifacts and documents for decision making. In a nutshell, the business case is the first point of entry in the requirements management. In this document, the accountable stakeholders for product strategy and business strategy justify the company's decision to take up the strategic initiative and formally declare the benefits expected out of the initiative. This decision is supported by documenting the short-term and long-term benefits by executing the initiative, the extent of market research to justify the need for this initiative, the amount of funding and funding schedule required to carry out the initiative, and finally, the specific measures such as the payback period, net present value to justify the return on investment for future opportunities. When such initiatives are rolled out, these initiatives could be done as a program containing multiple projects because of the extent of management and control required to integrate the benefits gathered from carrying out these initiatives as an integrated program, or it could be as a set of standalone projects. Either way, this is when the program charter or project charter is created appropriately. This document names the program or project manager, identifies the decision to execute the project, outlining the high-level outputs and outcomes, and authorizes the company's resources to carry out the work. Now, whether one is developing a product roadmap or a program roadmap, you can think of the roadmap as a visual, hierarchical, powerful representation of what high-level functionalities make up that initiative, dependencies among functionalities or projects within a program, and how the product will grow over time, how to acquire the required funding to support the product or program, and how to align the various stakeholders to ensure the required benefits are realized. Finally, the benefits register is an artifact that lists all the planned benefits expected to be delivered at various points in the releases or iterations or program and its component projects. My goal is not to discuss all these artifacts in requirements management, but if you understand these critical elements, you truly understand both the strategic value and benefit expected out of a product, program, portfolio, or project. This helps in identifying and eliciting the right level of requirements and align them to strategic value. Having talked about value so much, I have come up with my own way of categorizing value. The first category is the customer value add. For instance, What does the paying customer want? And what exciters can we actually add to keep the customer with us? Then we move to the next level of business value add. Examples could be looking at the types of documentation required to sustain the business or training needed for internal and external users. The business value add can also manifest as a technical value add. Here, we look at the technical debt maintenance. On the hardware side, we can look at keeping the infrastructure current to avoid any risk from using any product beyond their shelf life. On the software side, we can look at ensuring the code is stable, manageable, and scalable by refactoring the code, automating areas that could benefit from automation, etc. Another way the business value add can manifest is on the process value add. The processes themselves should act like a catalyst for transforming the inputs to outputs, but not add too much overhead. The efficiency improvements through continuous improvement and effectiveness augmentation through operational excellence becomes the focus here. If it is not customer, business, technical, or process value add, then most likely this area leads to a non-value add. The requirements in this category are to be avoided as they are contributing to some type of waste. In lean management, we discuss the uneven demands or overburden of resources that may lead to 8 types of waste. Perhaps we can discuss this in another webinar. In the requirements analysis stage, we are writing requirements. About 20 years back, as I was working as a senior information systems analyst, I was looking at ways to ensure the requirements were understood clearly by the team that engineered the design, developed the solution, and tested the product. Mixing and matching some of the concepts I heard from attending conferences and listening to the experts, I came up with an acronym called CURTAIN to describe how a requirement should be. Concise. The requirements should use the verb form to describe the action expected from a user and the resulting outcome. Unambiguous. When the team member reads the requirement, there should not be more than one way to interpret the same information. Realistic. The anticipated output should be something that the team can deliver within the available constraints. These include scope, schedule, cost, quality, and other available resources constraint. Testable. The output should withstand a pass or fail test. There should not be shades of gray in how the test cases can interpret the requirement. Only then such test cases can be automated. Atomic. Every requirement should be unique and not be specified in other areas where ambiguity arises. Independent. The requirement should be independent without any dependency on the interpretation of another requirement. Necessary. Finally, removing the requirement should actually affect the requirement. If not, then that requirement is unnecessary. Now that we know the characteristics of any requirement, what are the types of requirements to write? Most often, requirements are often thought of as functional requirements. These are the expectations of the product or service directly from an end user or client interfacing with the system. But we should also think in terms of the non-functional requirements that puts constraints on the product or services. These include specific behaviors or process compliance beyond direct end user or client-specific requirements. Recall the business value add and technical value add requirements we had discussed. Additionally, we should also look at the system holistically within the application domain. Some of these could be business value add, technical value add, or process value add considerations. As we document the requirements, people think of them either as use cases or user stories. Those that follow Agile writing the user stories think use cases are not required. However, each play a specific and different role. Common among both these approaches is that they both describe the requirement from an end user perspective with an action and outcome. The difference is, however, very pronounced. Use cases think of the higher need and drill down the additional details that the user stories deliberately leave out. Use cases describe interrelationships among the users, which could be both human interface and non-human interface. User stories don't go into this level of detail. Let's explore these in detail. Use cases describe the needs assessment with the prerequisite relationship. They describe how an actor would interface with this use case, listing the basic flow of logical steps required. Then they move into the alternative flow when specific sequence is not followed. When exceptions arise out of the basic or alternate flow, the exception flow is considered. This is required so that the users can resume their work appropriately. The result is that valid postcondition as a result of successfully executing or failing to execute the test case is known. As a result, you can think of interaction diagrams and sequence diagrams in the design and development stages. So the testers can not only test the development but also the design expectations. User stories, on the other hand, limit the focus to allow conversation to happen within teams. The implementation details are not part of the requirements. The 3 C's of the user story is the card limiting the concise description, conversation for the implementation to be documented in other areas such as the tasks and subtasks, and the confirmation in the form of the done criteria. So user stories lack the context to a larger goal. They lack completeness encompassing all aspects of the goal and do not forecast what work may be coming up. But each has its place in the requirements elicitation and analysis. For instance, the consumer or market needs are first articulated. We then write the use cases so that these needs can be assessed using SWOT, PEST lead, or TOE approaches. Following the justification in the form of a business case to address these use cases, the roadmap is started with the program at portfolio, listing down the specific features to implement. These features could be the design elements or quality elements as discussed in the CVA, BVA, TVA, or PVA, that is customer value add, business value add, technical value add, or process value add, filling the product backlog. As these are groomed as user stories to be in a ready state, they are worked on by the team from the iteration backlog or project scope. Followed by review sessions, we may update the backlog with our findings. Alternatively, the retrospective sessions may lead to needs that may have to be evaluated for additional market research and additional use cases. So as you develop the requirements, thinking of the categories of requirements may be helpful as you refine the functional and non-functional requirements. An illustrative example is given over here. So the requirements can be thought of as product, business, and external requirements in this illustration. From the product aspect, you can start thinking in terms of portability, reliability, usability, and efficiency. Just expanding on one of them, efficiency can be evaluated for storage and performance. On the business side, you can look at the actual considerations for delivery, compliance, safety, privacy, and compliance to additional standards. External requirements analysis could be from ethical analysis, marketing analysis, communication, and legal and regulatory considerations. So, whether you are a project manager finalizing the scope of work for a project, or product manager or product owner developing the strategy with long-term roadmap and managing the execution with short-term backlog, simple approach is needed to navigate along the ocean of requirements ambiguity. So throughout my career, I have been thinking of how to represent these so that one can visualize these requirements categories agnostic of the actual product being developed. Here is where I came up with my 5 essentials of requirements gathering. This leads us to SPACE. SPACE itself is an acronym, and it stands for the stated needs, perceived needs, actual needs, cultural needs, and finally exploited needs. The stated need. These are the clear, specific needs that are often explicitly expressed. This is still not the easiest. Although they are mentioned directly by the client or the end user, if they are not articulating it well, then it needs more attention. The perceived need. Here is where additional research is needed. Here, the users are associating the product or service with something more than that is explicitly stated. In other words, if you are going to do product or market penetration, what makes the customer come back to us? What are the exciters? How do we sustain them? The third element is the actual need. Here, what is the satisfaction that the users are expressing as the benefits gathered from using the product or service? Sometimes this could be spoken, sometimes this may be unspoken. This is where solution evaluation, performing the voice of the customer and the voice of the business comes in very handy. In other words, by observing, by documenting, by interviewing, we actually come to have the stated or perceived needs met the user's original requirements. What actual needs did we really miss? This leads us to the gap analysis, actually. The cultural need. Here, the needs are focused directly on specific demographic or cultural elements that differentiate the product. So we are focusing on product and market diversification. So how can we improve engagement and promote stickiness within our products? We can evaluate those deferred decisions and see if they need to be revisited. And finally, the exploited need. Here, we are focusing on needs that have vulnerabilities that lead to abuse or misuse. So we don't want the product to be used in certain way or service to be abused in certain way, but we find out that's how people are using it. So here we need to use observations and patterns and additional insights that we gather on how our products or services are abused and misused. Creating abuser stories for extreme persona is a good start here. Solution evaluation. Now, as part of the solution evaluation, I came down with another approach, and I call that see through delivery. And the C itself, again, is going to be an acronym, and it stands for the success criteria first. Not just the priority of how things needs to be executed, but also a pre-negotiated customer acceptance criteria. And as work product moves through different functional departments and different members within the team, we evaluate what is called an entry criteria. Now, this is a well-articulated interim criteria on when work will be accepted downstreams within the teams. The third is going to be the exit criteria. These are well understood criteria on when additional work or investment will not be made. In other words, when enough is enough, so that you are able to move forward. Now we are entering our demo time using SpiraTeam, and I will be focusing on 5 different elements, which are going to be components, requirements types, requirements workflow, digital signature, and the suspect flag. For the demonstration part, I have now come to my cloud instance of Spira, and the first thing that we want to demonstrate is the components. To do that, I want to go to the administration section over here. And I'm assuming that you have access to the administration section. So when you come into the administration area, you see a panel on the left side. And there are a number of different things on this panel, but I'm going into the requirements section, and within that something called components. Once you come into the component section of Spira, you can actually list different categories of requirements that you want to capture. Now, as I mentioned, we can capture functional requirements, non-functional requirements, and within each one of them, you can go into additional categories of requirements. We talked about those things earlier. So this is an area where you can actually list all those categories that you are thinking about and list them here. That way, every time you actually start writing a requirement, you can categorize them or you can associate them with appropriate categories. So for instance, when I go into the requirement section of this, so all the different requirements are coming up. Now I can drill down by these components, or I can look at all the different components and figure things out. So the way you can also associate them is by clicking on one of the requirements. When you are creating or modifying them, you can come here and start associating them as the component over here. So the top here is saying component, and the drop down field for this is coming directly from what you had entered in the requirement sections over there. That's the first part. The second part is going to be the requirements type. If you recall the section where we had talked about the use cases, user stories, design, quality elements, and things like the feature and all those things, that's what we are going to go right after. And so to get to that, you want to come into the edit workflow section, and at the very top you have some of these basic things that are already part of SpiraTeam listed over there. So for the default workflow, you have the design element, feature, the need, the quality, user story, and use cases already listed. So all these things are already available, and that's where you can come back and start looking at these elements. Okay. Now, the way you can actually start looking at the requirements themselves is by evaluating what these requirements are. So when I go back to the requirement section again, at the very top you see the type equals feature. So there is a drop down box right over here, and when you look at this, there is a design element, feature, need, and all those things. So you can actually look at this requirement type and associate the right kind of requirement type so that you can evaluate them. The good thing about these things are there is also a workflow. So when you see here, it says status is requested, and then there is a list of operations listed. So when you click on this drop down box, it basically says, accepted or review requirements and things like that. Where are those things coming from? And that's what is going to come from the actual workflow itself. That's the third element we wanted to demonstrate over here. So we talked about the requirements type, and these are all associated with the default workflow here, and the default workflow steps are listed here. So I'm going to click on the steps to actually gather more details about this. So when you go inside this, you see that the requirement is going to be listed as requested when you initially start. From there are a list of transitions. It is these transitions that come as operations on the requirements tab itself. So you can accept them, you can consider them as duplicate, you can review them for additional information. And when you click on one of those operations, the actual status changed to be this. So from this state, you are moving into this state. So accepted, rejected, under review. And then when you look at let's say under review, from under review you can assign it to somebody else for additional review, and then that person can say, okay, everything is good, and accept or reject them, and accordingly the states are moving forward, right? So when I look at a particular transition itself, there is this require electronic signature. This is a toggle, and once you have made this an electronic signature requirement field, that information gets provided into the operation fields itself. So I'm going to go pick up one of these requirements at this point, and so something is at this requested state. So I'm going to pick up this particular one, requirements 26. Now that the requirements 26 has actually come up over here, I review this, it looks fine to me. So I say, although this is preliminary, this looks good to me for now. So let's say I've added some comments. So when I click on this, there is this accepted requirement. This little lock icon basically says that this requires some kind of an approval. So when I click on this accept requirement, and it requires me to maybe save some additional fields. So I'm going to look at this and say, all right, okay, that's good. And now it comes back with this login password, which is a secured way of me telling like, okay, now provide your actual signature by logging in with your credentials. So I'm going to log in with my credentials. And, I'm associating a meaning, I basically said, okay, I'm the person and I'm reviewing this. You can add some additional thoughts here, and then you hit the sign button. So now it changed to the accepted state. Okay. Now you can also start coming into the history tab under the admin view and see that there is this valid signature, associated, mentioned over here. So it kind of, takes care of your auditability concern as part of your workflow, which is governance. Okay. So that's the part that we wanted to talk about. So we have right now talked about components, requirement types, requirement workflow, digital signature, and then I want to talk about that suspect flag. So in order to do the suspect flag, I'm going to go to the requirements again. So now I have a huge list of stuff that I'm able to see. So to check the suspect flag, I'm coming back to all the list of requirements, and I'm going to pick something from here and demonstrate that. So to demonstrate that, I need you to understand a couple of things, the traceability between requirements and test cases. So let me pick this particular test requirements, which is ability to edit existing books in the system. So it is this requirement at this top, and this is the information. That's fine. So I go into the test coverage. So this is a single stop shop for me to actually look at all the different things. So I'm coming into the test coverage. This one is not run, so I'm going to pick this up and check that particular test case. So now the test case looks good to me, and this is the suspect flag that I talked to you about. So right now it is empty, and this is not something that you can directly come here and immediately edit, but this is empty. Okay, so that means the test case has no changes based upon those requirements originally written. Okay, so now we are good with that. The requirements were written, somebody wrote the test cases, and this looks good. Now I'm going to go and change the requirement. Now, because you are now in test cases, I'm able to see the coverage to the requirements. So I'm going to go back to the requirements, and I believe this was the one that I looked at, requirement 5. So I'm going to go back and click on the requirements right now. So I came to the test cases from the requirements. So now I'm going back to the requirements from the test cases. Okay, so I'm back over here. So this is the test case that we were looking at. And now I'm going to come here, and this is good. I don't want this. I want to say, this requirement has now changed because market needs require capturing edition information also. So something I have typed, and I am just changing something else. This is no longer regulatory, this is statutory, and this is still author management. So that's fine. So I made some changes over here, and I also said added new changes. Okay, added comment, and I added all these things, and now I'm basically hitting on the same. So that means the requirements has changed. So now if I go back to the test cases and start looking at the check edition updates, which was the original test case that we had seen, you can go back to the overview tab. Now you see it changed. It originally, this was empty. Now it basically comes back and says, yes and no, which means after the test cases were developed, requirements changed. Something about the requirements changed. We don't know what changed, how many fields or what different attachments were modified or whatever it is. So based upon the requirements actually changing, the test cases actually modified themselves to be a potential suspect for review. And now you can run some reports around this to verify whether this test case really needs to be updated, and it sparks the dialogue between the testers and the developers and the business analyst or the product owners, whoever is writing the requirements, to say what changed in this particular requirement, and then evaluate whether the test case needs to be modified and make corrections accordingly. So this is the fifth element that I wanted to talk about. So we have so far talked about the components, the requirements types, the requirement workflow, digital signature, and the suspect flag. So all these things are elements that I already talked throughout my presentation earlier. So that brings closer to our demonstration. So let's go back. Okay, so in summary, requirements have a life cycle. The better thing to do is seeing the big picture using systems thinking. That way you are able to see the why behind the requirements and also see the life cycle behind the requirements. Understand that requirements have to be analyzed through the use cases and the user stories. So don't get yourself locked into the situation that you only have to have a user story because you are using an agile framework, or you only have to use a use case because you are supposed to be working on a plan-driven approach and things like that. And use my approach of space: the stated need, the perceived need, the actual need, the cultural need, and the exploited need for higher order requirements gathering that you can further drill down for needs assessment. And finally, categorize requirements and evaluate various types of requirements, both from a user interface, like a human user interface, as well as from a system interface standpoint. So the next steps are, if you have any questions, please reach out to Ms. Thea for course-related administration questions, or to me for any content-specific questions that we have actually discussed so far. So I recommend that you actually register for the 4th webinar and also look for the webinar quiz in the email. Thank you for watching.